Your country is in big trouble.
Can I
Wait a
answer?
minute. No. You've done a lot of talking. Your country is in big trouble.
I know.
You're not winning.
I know.
You're not winning this. You have a damn good chance of coming out okay because of us.
Mr. President, we are staying in our country, staying strong from the very beginning of the war. We've been alone, and we are thankful. I said thanks
you haven't
in
been
this
alone.
cabinet,
you
and
haven't
not
been
only
alone.
in this cabinet.
We gave you, through
I
this
said,
stupid president, $350 billion.
You voted
we gave
for
you
your
military
president.
equipment,
You
and you
voted
men
for
are
your
brave,
president.
but they had to use our military.
Yes. What about
if you didn't have
You
our
invited
military
me-
equipment,
You invited
if
me
you
to
didn't
speak.
have our military equipment, this war would have been over in 2 weeks.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt, joined by Charles C.W. Cooke, senior editor at National Review. Of course, he has his own podcast, Charles C.W. Cooke. Charles, I played most of the meltdown in the Oval. Your reaction?
Well, I don't like it. I don't think that's how U.S. presidents should behave. I've seen a lot of people say that this is how world leaders talk to each other behind closed doors. I dare say that's true. And should be true, given the stakes. But there are some things that are much better staying behind closed doors rather than being filmed in the Oval Office, and I think that was one of them.
Now, Rich Lowry posted over on X. I didn't see this live. I was in a meeting all morning, so I had to come back and listen to it. First thing I saw was Rich say, Zelensky was in a terrible position, but he never should have gotten sucked into making argumentative points. It should have been, 1, the war never would have happened with Trump. 2, I appreciate his efforts for peace. 3, we too want peace, but also what's in the best interest of our country. It goes on. It's very pacific. What I have just said, the only thing I think, he ought to get on the phone with Lindsey Graham, Tom Cotton, other supporters of Ukraine like me and like you, and find out what to do with Bret Baier, because that's going to be the most watched interview ever, other than a presidential debate. What do you think he should say in that interview?
Well, I wonder if he can say what he needs to say. And what I mean by that is that as a realpolitik description of how he should have gone about the interview, Rich Lowry is absolutely right. You have to play Trump. You have to know who Trump is. By this point, he should know who Trump is and how to talk to him. But if he doesn't know that by now, Hugh, if he made the mistake that he just made, which doesn't, by the way, let Trump off the hook completely, because acknowledging that someone is difficult doesn't forgive that difficultness, then I don't know how if he's going to be able to shift gears with Bret Baier. I mean, it just seems to me that what you have in that clip is a man, Zelensky, who showed up and got it wrong. He should have worn a suit.
Yes.
Official at the stand. That's important to Trump, so he should have done it. He should have done it because he's meeting world leaders in the Oval Office. He shouldn't have been belligerent. Trump should also have been the bigger man. He's the president of the United States. He should have said that the disagreements would continue behind closed doors. And J.D. Vance should not have taken the opportunity to blow the meeting up, which he did. I mean, I've seen some people say this was planned. I don't think it was planned in the sense that this was an ambush or this was the intent of Trump and Vance all along. I do think both of them are very frustrated with Zelensky, and they weren't unhappy about the opportunity to broadcast that live. So whether Zelensky can shift gears with Bret Baier, I don't know, because I just don't understand how, if I, who doesn't know an enormous amount about foreign policy and is not in charge of Ukraine, know that you don't do that when you're trying to negotiate with Donald Trump. How does he not know that?
Yeah, Charles, there's my first big job out of college was working for David Eisenhower, and then I went to work for Richard Nixon as a ghostwriter on The Real War. There's a chapter in The Real War about summitry. Never go to the summit unless you know what's on the other side. In other words, you work it all out beforehand. You don't freelance. I don't think J.D. freelanced. I listened to his whole speech to the Catholics this morning. Wonderful speech, by the way, fabulous speech. So I think gratitude matters a lot to J.D. Vance. Some people don't care about gratitude at all. Other people remember everything. And I think it means a lot to J.D. Vance. And I don't think there was any gratitude at all. And I don't even know that you need to believe it to say it, do you?
No, I mean, just to be clear, as I say, I don't think that it was planned like that. What I do think is, when you're very annoyed about something and it's been simmering for a long time, and then something happens that reminds you of it, or you see an opportunity to bring it up, and you know that it's going to blow up a meeting, you know that it's going to be a big deal, but you do it anyway because you're frustrated and you think this is the only way of changing the status quo. I think that's what J.D. Vance did today. That's not a defense, because I don't think that the vice president should do that. I have no problem whatsoever with world leaders talking to each other in the most belligerent terms behind closed doors. I just don't think that should happen in the Oval Office. I know some people like it. They think it's good for transparency. I just don't think that foreign policy is a realm where you want that sort of transparency.
Don't go anywhere, Charles. We're going to talk during the break, and then Charles will be back on the program. Lots to talk about. Don't go anywhere. I'm Hugh Hewitt. I am back with Charles C.W. Cooke. Charles, I opened the show by saying I had fun with Trey Gowdy this weekend talking about the Melian dialogue, because I learned about it my first week in college. I'd never read it before. And Trey threw out a reference to it. And I said, nobody knows what that is, Trey, the Melian dialogue? Really? And we had some fun, but I think this moment is going to be taught as part of International Relations 101, how not to do it for decades. Do you agree with me?
Yes, I do. You know, I saw a lot of comments along the lines of, well, this would never have happened to Churchill. I think that that's probably true. But, you know, Churchill said that no man had ever wooed a lover in the way that he wooed Franklin Roosevelt. Winston Churchill spent about half of his time between the outbreak of World War II and Americans coming into the war after Pearl Harbor, trying to work out how to make Franklin Roosevelt do what Britain needed Franklin Roosevelt to do. So again, without downplaying what happened from Trump's end, which I've been very critical of, this is going to be one of those moments that is taught as a astonishing break with, well, astonishing break with the stakes, right? I mean, this is everything to Zelensky, and to allow himself to get into that situation is astonishing.
I'm going to have Dwayne pull up a clip that I used earlier this week from the narration of Andrew Roberts' book, Masters and Commanders, where how did George C. Marshall counsel people to deal with FDR, which I want to play for you when we're back on the air. But I wonder, Charles, did you see the Ukrainian ambassador who's been a guest on this show? Because I'm a big supporter of Ukraine. She's been a big guest on this show a number of times. She had her head in her hands.
Well, right. As I say, the stakes are very, very high. And I think her head was in her hands because she sensed that Zelensky had played it wrong, but also that she saw the mercurial and the ill-disciplined side of Donald Trump that I don't think is a credit to America.
Well, it isn't. It's not how Nixon would have handled it. It's not how, but it would never have happened. I really don't know how this happened, and you might be right that there's an itch that J.D. Vance had to scratch, and that is gratitude. You know, he mentioned something, Charles, the visit to the ammo factory in Pennsylvania with Josh Shapiro and a Democratic congressman. Yeah. Clearly, that bothers people. I laughed at that bothering people, but I guess it does.
Well, I think that should bother people. I don't think it should be the most important question by any stretch of the imagination. But I do see why that bothers people. And I think that was a blunder, and I said so at the time. I mean, you do not, when you're in a situation like Zelensky's, when you're allied with the United States, not with Joe Biden or Donald Trump, go and make it seem, even if it's not the case, as if you are endorsing or an organ of one of the two parties. That was a crazy move.
And we're going to go back on the air now. Stand by, Charles. It was a crazy move. And again, I wonder who is advising him. Stand by. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. I'm joined by Charles C.W. Cooke, senior editor at National Review. Also hosts the Charles C.W. Cooke podcast, frequent contributor to the National Review's The Editor's Podcast. Charles, I mentioned to you earlier this week, I played a minute and 20-second clip from the book Masters and Commanders, one of the best book that Andrew Roberts has written out of many great books. And it's about FDR and Churchill, about George Marshall and Sir Alan Brooke, whom not many Americans know, but is the counterpart to George C. Marshall, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs for Great Britain during the war. And here is George C. Marshall writing a letter to an Army commander who's about to receive a visit from FDR. Can we play that clip?
Roosevelt conducted his own discussions on military strategy, sometimes without reference to Marshall, who resented it, but who saw that the president, charming, organizationally haphazard, brilliant and extremely wily, needed very careful handling. An early insight into the way that Marshall did this is afforded by a private letter he wrote on the 22nd of November 1939 to Major General Asa Singleton, Commandant of the Infantry School, with suggestions for how to manage the President's forthcoming visit there. Whatever arrangement is made, Marshall counseled, no one press him to see this or that, or understand this or that. Whatever is furnished him in the way of data should be on one sheet of paper, with all high-sounding language eliminated, and with very pertinent paragraphed underlined headings. If anything needed to be explained, a little sketch of ordinary page size is probably the most effective method, as he is quickly bored by papers, lengthy discussions, and by anything short of a few pungent sentences of description. You have to intrigue his interest, and then it knows no limit.
So, Charles, that's George C. Marshall talking about FDR. You take your presidents as they come, I think.
Right. Yeah, and that's from the perspective, of course, of Churchill or those who wanted something from the president. And that matters enormously because those people need to get what they need to get, and Zelensky needs to get what he needs to get. But I, as an American citizen, can also judge the president by his behavior. I don't think all of Roosevelt's qualities, as described there and elsewhere, were positive. And I don't think Trump's are either. So what you have here is a president who often behaves badly, matched with a figure, Zelensky, who, astonishingly enough, by this point, has not learned how to handle him, and that led to that explosion.
Well, what we also have here is a country on the line, and not a NATO ally, but an ally of the United States, and our frontline allies, Poland, Romania, everybody that borders on Ukraine. They need Ukraine to stand strong, and we need it to stay free. And this didn't go well. And I just want to resurrect the opportunity. So let's talk, people listen to this show from both sides of the aisle. Forget the Democrats. What should Republicans be telling JD and Trump right now about diffusing and relighting or rekindling the fire of friendship?
Well, whether they will is a separate matter. But the biggest mistake that anyone can make in foreign affairs is to confuse the personalities for the nations and the stakes. And the first thing anyone who can get through to Trump and J.D. Vance should be saying is, fine, stipulated, he's annoying, or his behavior was bad, or he upset you, or his conduct was inappropriate, but can we remember what it is that we are talking about here, which, as you say, is Ukraine and the future of Eastern Europe. The Zelensky thing in American politics has become horribly personalized, in my view, on left and right. Some people absolutely adore and lionize him. Others seem to hate him. All of the fallout from today is about he said this, or he was ungrateful, or he argued. Again, true. I said it myself. He should have worn a suit. But the ultimate issue here is Ukraine, and I would hope there would be someone who can convey that to Trump and Vance, who must know it, but who didn't remember it this afternoon.
Yeah, there are tens of millions of Ukrainian Christians, for example. And J.D. Vance gave a speech today about Christianity and its value and its graces, said a prayer for Pope Francis. It was J.D. Vance at his best. I really do think it's a gratitude thing, that it's deeply ingrained in him, coming from where he came from, that he's grateful to the United States Marine Corps, he's grateful to Yale, he's grateful to the people who gave him a start in Silicon, very grateful. And he's got some advisors. There are these isolationists in the party, and he's not their enemy. He's not, I don't know that he's captured by them, but there are isolationists within the Republican tent. They love this. They're cheering today.
Yeah, well, they don't think that we should be helping Ukraine at all, and that falls, I think, into two camps. Some of those people just flatly don't believe that the United States should help anyone in the world, while there are still needs unmet in the United States, which practically means you would never help anyone because there will always be needs unmet. And then there are people who are a little more sophisticated who believe that the United States does not have a compelling interest in helping Ukraine. Now, that is a defensible argument. There are parts of the world where we really wouldn't have an interest, even though we would be able to see that a country was invaded and that this was illegitimate. We probably wouldn't have a good reason to get involved. I just don't buy that argument. That's why I'm not an isolationist. I don't think that America is unaffected by what happens to Eastern Europe. I don't think the removal of Ukraine as a buffer zone between Russia and Poland is an issue of no consequence. I don't think that the integrity of NATO is irrelevant. So, I'm not one of those people. I think you can maybe persuade one of the groups I described. You certainly can't persuade the other.
No, you can't. I got to go to break. I'm going to come back with Charles C.W. Cooke one more time on the air and one more time off the air. So don't go anywhere, America, except you'll see it all over on the YouTube channel, hear it all on the podcast tomorrow, because I put all 5 segments of both Charles and then next hour Ben Domenech there and make it available to you. Please like and subscribe. And remember, Charles got a podcast. And I cannot wait to hear the next edition of The Editors, because that's going to be interesting depending on who the lineup is. Stay tuned. 3 minutes off air here with Charles C.W. Cooke, then we'll finish on air. Charles, the president said to Zelensky, we're talking about World War III here. What that refers to, obviously, I've said Putin is a war criminal, but Russia can't be defeated in any kind of traditional sense of defeating a nation state because they got thousands of nukes. To what extent do you think the president really is thinking about that risk?
I think it does worry him, but that it's also a convenient pretext for his desire for peace. Now, I don't say that entirely disparagingly. I, having watched this president for a long time, genuinely think he is horrified by war and death. I read reports in the first administration of him pulling back planned American action around the world because he was shown the likely casualty figures. He seems to be more bothered by that, and this is to his credit, than most people who've been president of the United States. So I do think he worries about it. I also think that is a talking point you hear from a lot of people who are just tired of funding Ukraine and who want to bring this whole thing to a close. So where one ends and the other starts, I don't quite know. Okay,
so Secretary Rubio said nothing, as far as I can tell, in this meeting. Do you think he has a role here between now and Bret Baier and then tonight and tomorrow that perhaps nobody else can fill?
Well, if he does, it's going to be behind closed doors, because the first thing he did was tweet praise for Donald Trump for having put America first, in his words. Now, of course, he's serving at the pleasure of the president. He is not an independent source of power. So if he's going to play a role here, it's going to be in back channels, not publicly, which is where this whole thing should have been conducted from the beginning. I find it very difficult to believe, knowing Marco Rubio's history, and he was my senator for a long time, that he wants Zelensky's last actions in America to have been essentially expelled from the White House and then gone home.
I agree. I agree with everything there. I have one more question for Charles after the break. Don't go anywhere, America. Welcome back, America. Coming up, Ben Domenech will join me, and we'll go over some of the same ground. Charles C.W. Cooke is my guest, editor at National Review, host of the Charles C.W. Cooke podcast, contributor to The Editor. Charles, we live in an environment that feeds upon itself continually. We're talking about something that happened an hour ago, and we'll be talking about what happens in 2 hours with Bret Baier. I am blessed by going on vacation next week. I get to go play with my grandkids and be off the air for a week. I don't have to say anything or tweet anything. What's your advice to people? I mean, there are emergency podcasts and there's audience to be had. What's your advice to people about commenting on this?
On the meeting that we just saw, or in our politics in general?
No, the meeting we just saw. I like the feedback loop that is developed. I think it's very healthy. I'm not sure I have much more to say about this.
No, I mean, the problem with this story is we saw that remarkable clip, and you and I have talked about it for the last 15 minutes, and we have absolutely no idea what is happening diplomatically.
Correct.
And Trump's statement afterwards was both harsh and soothing. As I say, Marco Rubio said yeah to Trump and then is probably on the phone right now. So my advice would be comment away on what we just saw, as we just have, but don't assume that it tells the whole story or you know what is going on, because in foreign policy you very often don't.
Yes. Have we talked before about Palmerston? Country has permanent interests, but no permanent enemies or allies.
Yeah.
Actually, Ukraine is our permanent ally, even if people don't understand it. We might get along with Russia, but we're never ever going to be friends with Putin. And I just want to close on that. Do you agree or disagree with me on that?
Oh, I agree. Not only is that true, that ought to be true.
Well said. Charles C.W. Cooke, thank you. I appreciate the extra time today.